Welcome, everyone, to the 8 Domains of Human Potential, a podcast designed to help business professionals, coaches, and leaders to elevate their well being and success as a whole person. I'm Laurel Elders, founder and CEO of the Institute for Integrative Intelligence. We're an ICF accredited coach training and education provider where it's our passion to elevate human potential through the art and the science of masterful
Mm.
coaching. I have with me today Howie Adams. Howie is a retired dentist turned coach and senior
Mm.
faculty here at the Institute. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of somatics. So, somatics is one of the 8 domains that we teach about at the Institute, specifically the neurobiology of emotional intelligence. Howie, welcome.
Thank you, Laurel. I look forward to this conversation. Curious to see where it goes.
Me too. Me too. All right. So before we dive in, can you share a little bit more about what called you to coaching after retiring from a successful career as a dentist?
That's an answer that brings together a lot of different possibilities to share with you. In dentistry, obviously, we wanted to provide technical excellence, but the other aspect that was very important for our team in the office was the relationships that we had with people
Mhm.
and understanding that it was very important to be aware of and sensitive to are the clients that we're working with, the patients we're working with, feeling safe? Is there a level of trust? Do they feel seen and heard? And in the background, intuitively, we were very sensitive to all of that. During the time that I was in the end of my career as a dentist, I was also participating with homeless teens in the foster care system and facilitating grief groups. And the common thread through all of that is that people want to be seen and heard and accepted just for who they are. They want to feel safe. They want to have a sense of trust so that they can feel vulnerable and receive services. And so it was more than just dentistry, but it was so much of the foundation of the relationships that we built with people. So that common thread is similar to what we provide in coaching. And what really flipped it over to coaching, other than being a client myself, was one organization called Touchpoint Connection, where we were coaching teens in a inner city high school. And I was a volunteer at the time. And the more I heard more about the basic fundamentals and principles of coaching and blending that with what we were intuitively doing in the relationship building, I then sought to get officially credentialed in coaching school and have loved it ever since.
Oh, yeah, that's always been inspiring to me. And I'm curious if you want to share a little bit more with our listeners about Touchpoint Connections and the impact that it had on teenagers.
It had a great impact. The founder, Joan Martin, had started a program of volunteers in the Seattle area and moved to Tucson. At the time, I was a youth advocate with homeless teens at Youth on Their Own, a local nonprofit. And what we found, and the name implies it, that if we apply just a touch point of connection,
Mm.
no rescuing, no fixing, no giving answers, with all respect to mentoring, not giving any advice, but being present, holding space, a safe space, and being very patient in the connection with the students at this inner city high school. We found that over time, their caution, their need to armor up and protect themselves from this strange adult that's come into their lives. And you notice how I put my hands here. It's almost a metaphor for what they were doing. Those barriers that they put up while they were testing to see if they could trust and feel safe around this individual that they were just meeting softened. And we found that the work that we did was very impactful. We held focus groups and interviews with the students, and the school district held information and data of the students that weren't being uh, served with coaching by these volunteer coaches, such as myself at the time. And in terms of behavioral referrals and attendance and grades and graduation rates, our kids excelled over the control group, if you will. Now, they were more intentional to begin with, but it was really an indication that providing that safe space in and of itself and really holding a sacred art, as you said earlier, for these students really allowed them to open up and feel like they didn't need to protect themselves as much and explore choices in their lives and see that life had opportunities that they can move towards their dreams.
I just so value that. And thank you for sharing more about it. It's such a
Mm,
powerful project and something actually near and dear to my heart. When I was growing up, I share openly that I really struggled as a teenager. And
mhm.
coaching versus being told what to do or what I should do, what I shouldn't do. But I mean, to be actually coached as a teenager to my own answers, that would have been a game changer.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was for these students. And, something that's very interesting, part of that that I think is relative to the coaching we're doing now, is at the beginning when we started the program, the students were selected by counselors and teachers. And they were very resisting and very resentful of all of that. And then we evolved a process where they self selected and they recognized that through the process of an assembly that we held and witnessing coaching for what it was in this assembly and then practicing it with each other, they started to get almost the taste and the feel of what coaching could be, and not being told what to do, but actually connecting with what was really true for them and living into their dreams. And so it was very exciting.
Oh, I love that. And I'm curious if you noticed, since we're talking about somatics today, if you noticed any
Mhm.
somatic shifts as the, the teens were going through this process with the coaches.
Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, there's something I want to preface that. There's something that I learned in coaching school, that there are phenomena and then there are interpretations. So the phenomena that I'm speaking of, I mean, for you and I, we could go see the same movie and have completely different takeaways and completely different interpretations. So in answer to your question, if we were observing the, as we say with air quotes, body language of the teens, it was easy to see how they were back and withdrawn and again holding back and silent. And the shifts that we originally were observing were minuscule in that the students would come, but they were holding back, literally, somatically, in their postures and gestures. And so, in the shifts that we were starting to notice, is in our interpretations and what we found out later from the focus groups and the interviews that we had with the students at the end of the pilot program, is that they were leaning into it all. They were softening. Their tone of voice and the way they expressed themselves was more animated. And for instance, shoulders, instead of being held up, were more relaxed in position. There was just more ease about them, which made them more open to the coaching process as well as exploring their choices. These were interpretations on our part, but yet through the process of coaching and inquiry, we were getting confirmation and validation, for instance, by saying, I just noticed that you leaned into that question differently and you responded with a tone that seemed to have more energy. Is that correct? And if they affirmed that, then our interpretations were starting to be coordinated and validated with theirs. So that's where the somatic starts to integrate with the coaching process.
Yeah, that's really a great way to put it, and it's so powerful. And I think that's personally one thing that I learned as a coach is how many assumptions I was making. So if I remove the assumption of what I'm interpreting and just be with the fact of what is in front of me, right, as a coach. So and that's where
Mhm.
the tuning into the nonverbals can come in.
Yes, and just really being so curious. In dentistry, it was about predictability and really being spot on. Coaching is a different playground. I mean, I'm even noticing for myself the smile that I just, as I'm looking at you on the screen, but the smile that I felt in myself. Coaching is an opportunity to be spaciously curious, to come from a place of not knowing, considering the coaching conversation an adventure and living in surprise. So, where we observe in the somatics of the coachee or the client a certain posture or gesture, not making any assumptions about what that interpretation or what that means, but inquiring into the client and understanding better through their experiences of what's going on for them. Otherwise, if we interpret it one way and they're really expressing it another way, then we're going off on different, as you use the word, avenues,
Mhm.
and the coaching conversation doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I've got a good example of that. In class, we were doing practice coaching sessions,
Mhm.
and I was being coached, and the the coach reflected back to me. I noticed that you laughed, and the
Mhm.
assumption was that was a positive. So what shifted? And I thought, well, wait a minute, I hadn't shifted internally. And I checked in with myself and I realized that was my defense mechanism. Like it
Uh,
just the observation took me to a deeper level of self discovery.
Perfect example. And I like your use of the word observation. We as coaches, if we attune to what's going on in us simultaneously while we're attuning to what's going on in the client and observe that and reflect that back with no attachment, then, as in your example, we find out truly what might be going on. And that doesn't mean that a coachee might answer a certain way, but if we connect with what's going on in our somatic response to what they're answering, we might challenge that. I heard you say this, but is it really possible that you're ignoring this?
Mm-hmm.
So there is the clarity that you had for self, but there's also the role of the coach still to challenge a bit if
Mm-hmm.
there's something that's still not connecting with our own somatic intuition.
Right. Like coaching into the gap if we see a
Hmm.
discrepancy. Yeah.
Yeah, that leads me to, invoke one of my teachers, Amanda Blake, where she refers to that we can create conceptual awareness between coach and coachee and frameworks and clarity around as we unpack stories. But there is also the opportunity as the coach to create somatic awareness simultaneously for ourselves and the coachee.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
your example was a perfect piece of that, what Amanda refers to as far as somatic awareness blending and integrating with conceptual awareness.
I also want to point out that this is not just a skill for coaches, leaders, consultants, many professionals can tap into just what just happened for somebody.
Mhm.
If we're in even gosh with teenagers, like my own raising kids as a parent, right? If there's some sort of discrepancy, how can we lean into, hey, what's going on? I just noticed a shift somatically. You don't have to word it that way, but just, oh, okay,
Mhm.
something might be going on. Let me inquire into it at a deeper level instead of just staying on the surface with someone. I remember when I first met you. I think it was about
Mhm.
10 years ago now.
I believe so.
Yeah. You were doing a presentation on somatics and coaching for the ICF Arizona chapter. And
Mhm.
I remember just being so blown away at that time
Mhm.
because I hadn't really gone there in the education that I had received at that time, as you know, where I was as a coach at that time. And
Mhm.
after we spoke, I realized that somatics is such an integral part to coaching the whole person and understanding the whole person and the whole self discovery process. We ended up adding 2 segments into our level 2 coach training because it was so valuable. I'm just curious, what inspired you to learn more about incorporating somatics into your coaching?
Hmm. Well, intuitively, again, we go back to the story of dentistry and working with homeless kids and
Mhm.
foster care kids. And I think I mentioned too that, I was facilitating grief support groups. And so somatics was just showing up all over the place, both in dentistry and the nonprofit work. The coaching school I happened to go to, that was a big emphasis. There was an acronym that they offered: B as in boy, E as in emotions, and L as in language, or B as in body. Um, and so the whole person that you're speaking of is more, again, what Amanda Blake refers to as just talking up here cognitively and cognitive awareness, although that's, very valuable. We, connect, in language, but also to recognize all the history. Amanda says that stories live in the body and memories live in the muscles. And so as explorers or coaches, as investigators will say, to just remain in the conceptual or the rational or analytical domain and omit all the information that's stored in the body or in the muscles of the body and the organs of the body, um, and not speak to that, we're not really allowing ourselves and our clients an exploration into their whole selves.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And we, in our level two program, we even talk about how to hear what's not said.
Mhm,
That includes somatic inquiry, absolutely. And also how to form powerful, more powerful questions,
mhm.
right? When we stay just in the mindset, we can miss some really powerful opportunities as coaches.
Yeah, and going back to the use of the word observations and being the observers that we are, of the observers that they are, or at least they, in that moment, we all both think we are,
Mhm.
to come from that place of not knowing and zero and simply reflecting back. Not just what I heard you say, did I get that correctly? But I noticed when you said that, your tone softened, or you got quiet, or your speech increased, or I noticed that all of a sudden there were furrows on your forehead. And we observe that, but there needn't even be a powerful question that goes with that. We can just share that observation and then let them do the work.
Yeah, what was going on for them. And
Mhm,
I appreciate the neutral observations, right? Because it's so easy if tone elevates that we might assume that's excitement. We might assume it's something. And letting the client self discover, wait, what was going on is so powerful
mhm.
because it then they can go in any direction that they need to go in. Yeah, it's so honoring. I'm just also curious, what lights you up about coaching?
Uh, well, again, I was a client myself, so I know from firsthand experience how beneficial it was for me to be listened to with complete acceptance for who I am, for what I was saying, for me connecting with painful memories,
Mhm.
and then moving through that. You used the word shift earlier, and shifting and seeing. Now I'm smiling because when I first had this very momentous coaching session with somebody who, when I was starting to get tearful and starting to connect with the pain that I had just so compartmentalized, um, she just sat there and just held space for me. There was no rescuing, no fixing, no hand on my shoulder, anything like that. She honored me and respected me, that I had the capacity, and trusted me that I could handle it. And so when I provide that for heal it forward, pay it forward, however we want to frame that, for a coachee, and I can see how they connect with their longings, connect with what's really their truths, that's just very, very exciting. And seeing people move into how they really want to express themselves fully into their lives, connect with others, it's just very, very gratifying.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking I completely see it too. I've shared that experience, seeing
Mhm,
the shifts in the clients. It's just, to me, it's really rich.
mhm.
And I'd love to hear more about what your thoughts are on this, the role of somatics for the coach. In other words, am I aware of my somatic presence and impact on my client?
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that and I go back to the dentistry. I mean, and there's a parallel here. When a client was intuitively, we were sensing that they just really needed some space, we would interrupt a clinical procedure and allow them to sit up and move, if we were talking neurobiologically, from a sympathetic nervous system, fight and flight, to a parasympathetic nervous system where they were back to ease. They would be more open to and accepting the treatment that we were doing. And there's a parallel with that, when we're considering the relationship that we have with our clients, and that when they are, and Richard Boyatzis refers to that from Case Western Reserve, when people are in their sympathetic nervous systems, they're going to be less apt to want to even consider their dreams, consider moving forward, consider choices or next steps. But when we can step back from those conversations and hold that safe space for them from curiosity and care, deep care, and connect them with their care and allow their neurobiological beings shift more into what he calls PEA, or positive emotional attractors, or parasympathetic nervous systems. Now they're back into what he calls renewal and more receptive to moving forward in the conversations and considering next steps and choices. Does
Yeah,
that
that,
answer your question?
yes. And it's really interesting too. I was reading how the brain can't both be in stress or having a stress response and creative.
Hmm.
So, what can I do as a coach, leader, parent, human being to help
Hmm.
someone get at ease first so that we can move into that creative exploration that's in the solution side?
Yeah, and I like to think of my coach. I mean, I talk slowly, but my coaching is slow coaching. In fact, that was one of the skills and exercises we did in coaching schools, to coach very slowly, to not be in a hurry for the next powerful question or not try to figure anything out. But sometimes I can approach this by coaching into the sympathetic nervous system, if you will, and respecting and honoring it. And then also inviting a client to take a deep breath
Mhm.
and sit back. And sometimes I will actually ask them to and hold their hands out and consider, this is where all those elements of the decision, for instance, that they're trying to make, or the problem they're having, or the relationship they're in. And let's just for a moment, and often invoke, let's be playful about it, which helps to start to move towards that PEA that Richard Boyatzis talks about. And let's just put it over here for a moment. It's there. You can have it back. And let's take a deep breath and let's come back to, tell me, if that's not there, now what do you care about?
Mm.
What are some possibilities? And that movement, and Amanda Blake speaks to movement as pieces, one of the aspects of neuroplasticity, of interrupting people living in, for instance, in our conversation, a sympathetic nervous system way, allows room for that parasympathetic nervous system to come in. And it shows up in the body. All of a sudden, again, observing, as we said before, and allowing them to interpret, it allows for the softening of the eyes, the voice to quiet, the shoulders to relax, the sensation in the gut to soften. And we know this by asking questions and checking in. If we notice what's going on somatically in the sympathetic nervous system in the conversation we're talking about now, and now we've put all that over here just momentarily. And now we kind of sense, now what's happening in your gut? What's happening with your pulse rate, the sweaty palms, or anything else? They can start to see that there are possibilities. And then ultimately, and Stacy Haynes from the Strozzi Institute uses this language of, how might we create purposeful practices? I love her language of purposeful, that they may invoke later when they're not on the call, to re-regulate themselves from that dysregulated place.
Yeah, so powerful. And it makes me think of in integrative intelligence, we view our clients as whole people. And
Hmm.
we explore this concept of powered by our own wholeness, the wholeness within
Hmm.
us. And then the entire premise of coaching, professional coaching, is that my client is the expert of their truth, not me. I'm the expert in giving
Absolutely.
coaching. They're their own expert and honoring that. And even coaching to the wholeness within them, right? So it's not just mindset. It's
Hmm.
mind, body, spirit, heart, and
Hmm.
really helping the client go through that self-discovery process. Which part of me is answering this question?
Interesting. Can you say more about that? Which part of me? I'm
Yeah.
curious about that.
What comes to mind for me is as I'm tuning into my clients, I'm listening for what part of them is answering. Are they in their head?
Mm-hmm.
Are they tuned in to their inner power, in their heart, and their
Hmm.
truth? So I'm
Hmm.
listening for cues and asking questions for them to let me and themselves know where they're at. So the somatic piece, I almost don't, I wonder if we could even get there to the heart if the somatic piece was just put aside and we just stayed in mental conversation.
Well, I'm a little prejudiced. No. And I want to, something that just came up for me when you're saying that, that it may be your listeners may say too, well, what do you do with the hardened CEO type or typically more male than female um, type that just doesn't want to get into the touchy feely?
Mhm.
Um, it's, little by little, I've found that I've coached, many an engineer and leader. And by the end of our coaching conversations over a period of time, they begin to start softening into that if we just hold a lot of space for them, and it could be something as simple and as, I noticed when you said that you looked over here, and they may not even know that you're referring to or integrating somatics into the conversation. And little by little, their somatic awareness is it's kind of like turning up the light bulb a little bit.
Mhm.
So when you said that, I immediately thought of, well, what about the people who don't want to do it with somatics? My invitation to anybody listening to this is that there's always opportunities. It's just a matter of how gentle and graceful and skillful we can integrate the somatics into the conversations.
Yeah.
And if they choose not to at all, then I accept them for who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. The honor wherever the client is at.
Mhm.
Do you mind if we go back a little bit to what you had mentioned about, going through some past pain in
Mhm.
coaching? Um,
Mhm.
and I wanted to explore that a little bit because I've noticed throughout the years that coaching can have a therapeutic impact on a
Mhm.
client, but is not therapy. The coach is doing zero therapy. Yet the client going through their own self-discovery process can have a therapeutic impact. I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences on that.
Well, I was coached that way, to
Mm.
where coaching was therapeutic but not therapy in per se. So let's invoke the language of the Strozzi Institute, where they speak of that we have tendencies that are conditioned tendencies or CTs. And we can exchange that for habitual behaviors or practices or autopilot or default, we under stress, but the language of the Strozzi Institute, Amanda Blake, Stacey Haynes, and others is that we have conditioning and tendencies. We didn't get that as an adult, be conditioned over many, many years. So in terms of your question, without being a therapist, if a client offers to me, well, that's just the way I react. And so playful, I'll say, well, be with me for a moment. do you think you responded that way when you were 1 year old or 2 years old? And they say, no, I doubt it. I mean, I was only 1 or 2 years old. Amanda Blake refers to those periods of our time when we're non-rational, non-analytical. We're just sensing into our environments, and our nervous system is trying to observe our environment and keep us in balance in it. So I might even from that point on and say, when and where did you start to develop that? When can you remember? And they may say, well, when I was 8, I remember being here, or 12 when I was in middle school and things like that. And they will tell the story around that. Now, we won't dwell on that or try to heal that relationship with a peer or parent or something. But now there's a greater awareness of, oh, this is the tendency that's showing up now. Maybe that's where it came from.
Mm.
There was probably a way, and Amanda uses the language of it served me then. It served and fulfilled something for me then. The question is it serving that now? If this is where you want to be and it served you then, what might we do to change that in some simple way to start moving to what you really want to be doing in relationships or decision making? Does that help to explain the question?
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to hear your insights on that one. And just to deepen some understanding for those
Uh-huh.
tuning in, if you haven't gone through a coaching education, there's some interesting distinctions. One that, as a coach, we may go into the past, right? Like Howie, what you were just
Uh-huh.
sharing, we can go into the past to inform the future. The difference is that we don't stay in the past. We shift. We invite the clients to shift into what they do want and have their hard-earned wisdom, their experiences in life really inform that. And the other thing about coaching versus therapy is that the coach has no direction in the background where the client's going to take their own wisdom,
Uh-huh.
where the client's going to take their self-discovery process. So the coach is completely neutral, asking the key questions to help the client move forward. Whereas in therapy, as a therapist, the therapist may ask questions and there's a treatment plan. They're they're being paid, they're hired to help get the client into the direction of health, whereas the coach is holding a completely neutral space and not getting the client into any direction other than the direction they want to go. So I just thought I'd bring that up, because
Well
the
said.
yeah.
I like the way you said that understanding the past without doing therapy, bringing it into the present informs their future. I like the way that you framed it as informing the future. And just to add a little substance to it, I'm a recovering people pleaser. Well, I can understand better through coaching of what I did, how I did it, and why I did it. Amanda Blake refers to essential nutrients that we neurobiologically and others like Maslow, Abraham Maslow, and others speak to the basic human needs. We want to feel safe. We want to feel connected and belonging. And we want to be treated with dignity and respect. So the way for me to fulfill that in the dynamics and how I was shaped in my family of origin, one of the sites of shaping that Stacey Haynes refers to in her book, The Politics of Trauma, was I fit in to the dynamics of my family by being a people pleaser. And therefore I was safe, I was connected, and I was seen. But it served me then. But being a consummate people pleaser as an adult, there was a disconnect. And so the more I saw that what I used to do and the cost in today's day, or when I was being coached, then it allowed me to start withdrawing from those habits that were a cost to me, that weren't serving me any longer, and inform my future, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah, so powerful. And it reminds me of just that, what coaching is doing. Yes, people come to coaching for goals and strategies,
Mhm.
and a part of the coaching process, especially when we get into transformational coaching and not just doing transactional coaching, where we're just
Hmm.
looking at goals and timelines, but we're actually getting into, well, wait, what's getting in the way of attaining the goals and the timelines? It's really just self-actualization, integration,
Hmm.
right? So what we are calling coaching to integration, it's helping the person gain new perspectives that open up possibilities in a completely new way. One really rich example, I was coaching a leader, and this leader was getting some really harsh feedback from the employees about just not feeling emotionally safe and being more like dictated to. And so
Hmm.
I came in with the coaching, and his self discovery was, wait a minute, I I know I'm not responsible for other people's feelings, and that's what he was operating under. I'm not responsible for other people's feelings. And that was creating negative experiences. So the
Hmm.
self-awareness of, wait, I am not responsible for other people's feelings, but I do care about my impact. There was the shift in that moment. And that awareness went with him for the rest of his leadership career, right? So it's really, to me, just so amazing how that self awareness just opens doors for people
Hmm.
to be in new ways that are more aligned, more impactful, more empowering.
You used a word that I really resonate with. As soon as you said it, I felt it and sensed it in my body. I want to integrate the somatics back into our
Yeah.
conversation here too, and that's care. Um, Richard Boyatzis, refers to having renewal in the parasympathetic, the PEA, and connecting people with their dreams. And so when we, in the moment of our coaching, have the opportunity for people to have the meta conversation and circle back, if you will, how does what you're saying or doing connect with what you deeply care about? Then that is a portal for them to move forward. So there are times in my coaching that I draw back, and I can feel myself somatically drawing back right now. And I invite the client too, similarly to, let's just put this aside for a moment. And I said, if you could, in an instance of a decision, if you could make the decision that really suited you in the best interest of you and you're taking care of what you care about, what would that look like? It just seems to quiet and it gives them that North Star. Dr. Bruce Perry from Australia, who I just listened to a podcast that he was on, talks about it takes them back to base camp. There are many metaphors for this.
Mhm.
And so when you use the word care, that's something that I consider. Am I listening to what they care about? Are they clear about what they care about? I mean, for me as a people pleaser, I didn't know my story. Then I found out my story. Then I said, oh, great. Now I understand why I'm angry.
Mhm.
And then that didn't serve me any longer. And then little by little, move towards, well, what really mattered most to me? What do I care about? And what's the cost of continuing with those conditioned tendencies? So when you said care, it just made me, think about how important that is to inquire into a client. So tell me, how does this connect with what really matters to you? What's most important? A question that oftentimes we bypass when we get into the weeds.
Yeah, that is so true. And I'm this is reminding me of, and I think I just had an epiphany when I'm coaching. Something that
Hmm.
I hear when somebody has a inner transformation,
Hmm.
the word that you used, softening. It's almost like
Hmm.
all the chatter calms, and there's just this simple truth, a new shift that has this calming impact. Like, I just realized I observe it somatically, the shifts that people
Hmm.
have internally, and then they're moving forward in life in new ways.
And again, back to the observer that we are, and the observer that they may not be in the moment. When speaking to what you're referring to, I just noticed that all of a sudden there seemed like something shifted. Is that correct? Or Julio Alaya, who is the lead teacher at the school that I went to, Newfield Network, would say, "What's cooking? I just felt something in me, something in you." And so, yeah, it's observable. Again, the interpretations in the client. And certainly tears are, unspoken words. And so when people are in that space, then I sit back. And one other thing, when those shifts are going on and what we intuitively sense in ourselves that are going on, that's where silence is a beautiful tool. And that we just hold silence. And sometimes I will declare for them, I'm sensing something. I'm going to be here for you. Just be with yourself for in this moment. And then they allow them to soften, as you said, and just go deeper and deeper into that. And those self explorations and those truths have room to percolate, to marinate, and to come forward. Or
Yeah.
not, but we
Yeah.
are allowing that space.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm also thinking of how in our society we're not really taught, at least I wasn't,
Mm,
how to tune into listening to my body, listening to what it's reflecting back. I've learned over the years that the body is kind of like we're driving a car, and the car has all these gauges. Like when the gas gets low, it tells you.
mhm,
The body is constantly reflecting back to us if we're in our heart, if we're in our head, what is a deeper truth, what's a memory. If there's a deficiency, nutritional
mhm,
deficiency, it can
mhm,
reflect that back,
mhm,
right? So the question is, are we listening? Are we tuning in? And or are we ignoring it? Are we judging
mhm,
or interpreting what it's saying versus just sitting with to see, wait a minute, I thought I was excited, and yet when I left that conversation, my stomach turned.
mhm,
What's that about? And sitting with it, right?
mhm.
So it's just really, I think, an important conversation to have about including somatic awareness, especially if we're looking at expanding.
Yes, I invite my clients to consider that if they notice something in their gut, like you mentioned, for instance, that's information. Do you want to play with that? I mean, we can, you know, get into the neuroscience of so many things and speak about, the vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system and honoring introspection as Amanda Blake, considers it. That's sensing the tingling in the gut or the tightness in the shoulders or the pounding of the chest and things like that. But that's a lot more information. And similarly, emotions in the grief support groups, people would say, it's not right to be angry. And, I'd invite them to consider if that's what's coming up for you, there's a purpose. Dan Newby from the School of Emotions would say there's a lot of information there. Emotions have a purpose, and there's a story behind that, and there's a somatic connection to what's going on with that. And it's not dogmatic or absolute. Let's play with that. Let's explore with that. What information might those somatic and emotional responses be giving us so that we expand beyond just the conceptual, analytical, rational, and reasoning ways of approaching things?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, so rich. I love this
Hmm.
conversation
Yeah,
as always.
likewise.
Well, thank you. We're at time for today. But Howie, thank you
Hmm.
so much for sharing your insights and perspectives. I always learn something from you, and it's always a pleasure to just explore these concepts.
Thank you. Just as we are co-equal partners with our clients, I do the same with you. So I picked up a lot of ways of framing things in learning and language. So thank you as well.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, we hope today's discussion has been a lantern for you on your evolutionary path as a business professional, coach, or leader, and to learn more about our ICF accredited coach training programs and our Leader as Coach program, you can visit us at integrativeintelligence.global. And everything that we've talked about today, we'll put some links for you if you want to explore further some of the science of what Howie was referring to. We'll get those links out so that you can dive deeper. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.
Thank you.